Have you ever been told to discover your God-given talents? What about use your God-given talents? I absolutely despise these things. Today, I'm going to talk about why I think these things do more harm than good. We'll look at some examples from the Bible where God asked people to do things that they just did not have the talent for. And we'll see what Paul has to say on the subject. Hi, I'm Jason, and this is Zany Discipleship Christianity Unboxed, where our goal is to joyfully live out our faith daily. So why do I think these sayings about God-given talents are so dangerous? Well, when we use our God-given talents, we run the very real risk of relying on ourselves and our talents instead of God. It can cause us to move away from a humble walk with our God to an arrogant walk on our own. King Saul comes to mind. He was very humble when God anointed him the first king of Israel, but after much success, he turned from God and started relying on himself. That is only one danger of God-given talents. That only happens after you actually find your God-given talent. What about all the people, and maybe you're one of them, that spend their whole life worrying, searching, trying to find this God-given talent that they never quite grasp? Maybe you know someone that feels like maybe their life is a waste because they don't have anything they're particularly good at. They're kind of like those slow kids at an Easter egg hunt. All the faster kids running around and they get to all the eggs. And these slow kids keep worrying that they're just not going to get any eggs as the time gets closer and closer to running out. People that can't find their God-given talents think maybe they don't have any worth, or maybe God doesn't love them or created them wrong because he never gave them a talent. The good news is that over and over again in the Bible, God picks people that we would consider wrong for the job. These people definitely did not have the talent for what God was asking them to do. The fun part is, it's not just us that think that. The very people that God was asking to do these things, well, they also felt this way. We're going to look at 5 incredible people from the Bible. All 5 show that God does not call the qualified. Instead, he qualifies the called. For each one, we're going to peel back the layers and ask, why on earth would God pick them? Seriously, when you hear their stories, your first thought might be, no way, that's a terrible idea. But we'll look into what the Bible actually has to say about God's reasoning. It's a journey that reveals a truly unique side of God's character, a side that delights in turning our expectations upside down. Are you ready? Let's jump in. First up, let's talk about Moses. This guy is a hero of the Bible, right? He led his people out of slavery from Egypt. He parted the Red Sea and was given the 10 Commandments. But before all of that, Moses murdered an Egyptian. He'd been living in the wilderness 40 years. So when God's looking around trying to find who's the best person to lead his people out of slavery, he chose a murderer on the run from the very country he's trying to free the people from. Can you imagine what Moses must have been thinking? He surely thought if he went back to Egypt, he would be put to death. Moses knew he was the wrong person for the job, and he told God as much. Moses kept making excuses for why he couldn't do it. Perhaps the best is that he's not a good speaker. Think about that. Probably every leader you know is a good speaker, and God chose someone that wasn't. So why would God pick Moses? Before we answer that, let's look at another hero, Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet to the nations, a messenger of tough truths to a rebellious people. He must have been someone with years of wisdom, a booming voice, and a lot of theological training. No, not at all. According to Jeremiah's own words, he was just a kid and didn't know how to speak. Not exactly someone we would pick for the job. So what is going on here? First a murderer with a speech impediment, and now a kid who had no experience speaking in front of people? Maybe God will do better with the next hero, Isaiah. Isaiah was one of the major prophets, and who God used to tell his people about the coming Messiah. Let's be honest, if it were us, we would choose someone upstanding, without blemish, and highly religious. But when God called Isaiah in a dream, what was Isaiah's response? Woe is me! I'm a liar. I gossip. I'm utterly unworthy for the job. So far, God the Father is making some pretty wild choices. Can you imagine trying to hire for these positions? You contract with a recruiter and have them send you the best candidates, and these are the ones they give you? A murderer with a speech impediment, a kid with no speaking experience, and a degenerate with a sailor's mouth. You would likely have a talk with them about how their entire job is to find qualified candidates, not these people that are obviously the wrong fit. I'm sorry, but I think we would all fire God and hire a recruiter that knew what they were doing. So let's do that. We fire God the Father, and we'll hire Jesus to be our recruiter. Let's see if Jesus can do any better. First up for Jesus is Peter. We know Peter as the rock of the early church, Jesus' right-hand man. He must have been someone with a strong theological background, someone respected in the community, right? No, he was an ordinary fisherman. Jesus sees Peter, someone that as a fisherman was likely known for telling raunchy stories and having a sailor's mouth, and sees something more. He tells Peter to cast his nets after a night of catching nothing. And after an enormous catch, Peter channels Isaiah and can think of nothing other than how he's a sinful man and unworthy. Yet, Jesus tells Peter to follow him and become a fisher of men. Finally, let's look at Paul, the greatest missionary of all time, the author of most of the New Testament letters. Before Jesus chose Paul, he must have been someone that believed deeply in Jesus. He must have been an outstanding leader of the church. Right? Well, no. He was a zealous persecutor of Christians. He was involved with the death of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. Jesus saw this and thought, that is the guy I need to help spread the word and build the church. So Jesus wasn't any better at choosing qualified candidates. Just like we fired God after he brought us those first three, we would do the same after Jesus brought us these last two. If you didn't already know how it turned out, you would really question God's sanity. But we do know how it turned out. And while we never would have picked these five, God did pick them. And he was right to do so. All five show that people who tell you that God gives us a talent that we are to use for him, they're missing part of the story. God doesn't just call the qualified, he qualifies the called. But why? To understand, let's first look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 to 29. Paul lets us know that one reason God picks people that are weak or unqualified for the job is so they cannot say they did it on their own. No one can say that Moses, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Peter, or Paul did these things due to their God-given talents because everyone knew they weren't qualified to do them. Therefore, it must be God qualifying the called. Everything they do because of God's strength and their own weaknesses. And so all honor and glory must go to God as well. Think about that for a moment. When we rely on our strengths to do God's work, how easy is it to take credit for those works? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we all do this from time to time. It's easy to do because we often take pride in our work. Perhaps you do publicly acknowledge that credit goes to God, but internally, you let yourself believe it's due to all the hard work that you've done to get to where you are. When we do things from our God-given talents, we like to believe it is our doing, and we downplay the role God had in getting us where we are. I mean, He only gave me the talent. I'm the one that's doing all the work. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 through 10, Paul says that God told him that God's strength is empowered by our weakness. Paul actually then boasted about his weaknesses. Now that is staying humble. And it's a good lesson for all of us. When we have success, we need to remember who helped us get there and give God the credit He is due. But wait, there's more. Is God getting credit the only reason He picks the wrong people? Absolutely not. The other reason is even more amazing. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 12, God tells Moses to go and that God would teach him to speak. God told Moses, it doesn't matter if you are a good speaker because I will help you. When God chooses us to do something that we're not good at, it forces us to rely on Him. It forces us to have a relationship with Him. And that is what God wants. God wants to pick us not because of our strengths, but because of our weaknesses, so that we allow Him to have a relationship with us. Are you ready to be picked by God and empowered by weakness? Moses, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Peter, and Paul all had extremely close relationships with God. They had to, because their God-given talents did not align with what they were asked to do. They could not rely on their own strengths, so they walked humbly with their God. The best part of this story is that God is still doing this today. He's still asking us to do things that we don't have the skills for. That's the only reason I started this channel. I don't have a clue what I'm doing, but I'm relying on God to show me the way. As zany as it sounds, God wants a relationship with each one of us. No matter how small or insignificant we might think we are, we're immensely important to God. The key thing to remember is that God often does not ask us to do what we're already good at. He also asks us to do things that we suck at because it forces us to rely on Him. And when we succeed, He gets the glory. It brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Has God been nudging you towards something that feels outside your capabilities? What unqualification are you holding on to that God might want to use for His glory? The important thing to remember is that God wants nothing more than to have a deep personal relationship with you. Share your thoughts, your fears, or even your zany experiences with God in the comments below. We love hearing from you and building the zany, authentic community. In the description below, you'll find links to books to dig into this topic further, as well as a link to the shirt I wore in this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and subscribe to see more of Zany Discipleship Christianity Unboxed. Until next time, stay zany, stay faithful, and remember, you are always picked by God.